So thank you all so much for being here today. Anybody that came to the event in this location around this time last year will remember it was a bit more sort of sparsely populated, not because of the content, because there was a blizzard and a cold snap and snow. So bright sunshine today, which is fantastic. I'm Emily Wright, Tech Editor and Head of Special Projects at EG. So good morning and welcome to our first Tech Live of 2019. It marks a big year for us at EG and a big year for tech and real estate. So what better way to kick off our tech events than with this absolute killer of a morning today. So, at least half of our speakers, including both of our keynotes, have appeared already on our Tech Talk Radio podcast, which I'm sure everybody here listens to. And that really is exactly how it should be, from podcast to live event, then into print. It's a sign of the times as much as is a sign of and is appropriate for tech. And we use all of our channels available to speak to the people and to catch up on the trends that we then put out to you, our audience. Speaking of print, though, and you might have noticed that today we launched the 4th EG Tech magazine. This publication has gone from strength to strength in a market where, I don't know if you know much about that market as it is at the moment, but launching a new print magazine is tricky and it's also quite rare, but it's really plugged a gap in the market, and some of the biggest names in tech and real estate are really keen to be involved and in our issues, and you'll see that this one stands out in particular. If you look at the cover, so Dan Doktorov, former Deputy Mayor of New York and President of Bloomberg, now founder and CEO of Sidewalk Labs, which is the urban innovation arm of Google's parent company, Alphabet. Probably one of the best known people in the sector at the moment, certainly one of the most intriguing. His plans to build cities from the internet up, starting with a test site in Toronto, hit the headlines in 2017. We have been chasing him down for an interview pretty much ever since. So after effectively turning up at his office in New York in November at Tech Week last year, he agreed to give us an interview. So do make sure you grab a copy when you leave and read all about his plans. Also in that issue, you'll find such delights as, are you being hacked by your kettle? Apparently it's much more common than I first thought. And the rise of the Baltic tech scene. And there's a standout piece on female founders attracting investment by our new EG editor, Sam McClary, who's also here today. Speaking of today, let's get back to today, and we have some incredible speakers lined up for you from all around the world, including keynotes from Vanessa Lee Butz, an EG rising star, and Miguel Gamino, who is the former CTO of New York, now Executive VP for Global Cities for MasterCard, and he's flown in from the States to be here. So we're talking today about connected cities and what makes a truly connected city. In a world where technology is increasingly powerful and all-encompassing, it would be so easy to assume that connectivity starts with the statistics and the data and the digital transformation, especially at an event like this. But there is an even more important element to consider first, an element that each and every city across the globe is built on, thrives off, and would collapse without, and that, of course, is people. At its most basic level, it is us that makes cities connected, the people who live in them and work in them and visit them, play in them, and there can be no denying the fact that the most successful cities of the future will be the ones that evolve and take on digital transformation to make room for digital advances from the way we live and work and the way we travel. But for these places to really prosper, the first thought has to be whether they are delivering what the people need and want. And that's what today's event is all about. So there'll be opportunities to ask questions via Slido, and I think there'll be details going up on that behind me in a minute, but it will be will we have Slido? Yes, hashtag EG Tech Live, so please do put the questions up there and I shall keep an eye on them. Also, as always, I like to try and keep these things as relaxed as possible, so if people do have a question they want to ask in real time, please put your hand up and I can ask it. So anyway, moving on to the first panel, tech that's changing our world. So let me introduce our first speakers. Joining us we have Miranda Sharp, Director of Innovation for Ordnance Survey, Duncan Walker, Managing Director of Skyports, and Nick Kirby, Managing Associate, Mishcon de Reya. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So, as I just said in the introduction there, cities are so important that there is that connection to people. but we're talking, of course, about digital transformation and technology. So let's start with that. And when it comes to new technologies and the way that they are impacting our cities and changing our cities, is there now an increasingly wider acceptance that change isn't just coming, change is here, and we are well and truly in the midst of what is real and crucial need for innovation? So let's start with Duncan.
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting as to whether it's coming and whether we need to proactively accept it. I think in large cases nowadays, if we aren't proactive about it and enabling it, it's going to happen to us. And we've seen that with Uber in London, ongoing court case still. There is a chance, or there was a chance, to be strategic about how you implement some of these technologies, whether it's Uber, whether it's to do with data migration or personal data, or whether it's to do with urban air mobility. There is a chance to be strategic about it. There is a challenge because those that need to be strategic about it are people in government at various levels, and they are some of the least strategic, some of the least proactive, and some of the least quick-moving people that exist on the planet. So there is
Anyone
a real...
from any of those? Feel free to put your hand up.
There's a real challenge there, and what I've found in my business over the last 18 months is dictatorships are fantastic. They're a brilliant way to enable tech, and okay, there's plenty of things that aren't so great about many dictatorships, but what they can do is push change through very, very quickly and be at the leading edge of some really innovative stuff. So we do air taxis and the urban infrastructure for moving people around by drone. And the best enablers in the world at the moment are Dubai and Singapore. And they just make stuff happen. They're really proactive about it. They want to be at the forefront of emerging technology. They work things out by doing stuff in a safe and well-managed way. But they do it, they test it, they see if it works, and then they change it. And they do that very quickly. That brings huge capital and huge human capital to those environments, and actually leaves London and other Western cities behind. There is a balance. We've got a much stronger voice of the populace, which in a way is good. In a way, it creates some challenges. So it is difficult for Western cities, which have a strong public voice and a fairly slow and multifaceted government, to be at the leading edge of these things.
And sorry, just staying on you, Duncan, for a minute. Do you think that there's a chance that cities like London are getting, for want of a better word, a little bit, I hate to use this word in relation to the city which we're in and which I live, but a little bit arrogant in terms of how far ahead we actually are compared to other cities?
Absolutely, yes. I think there is a general willingness. There is a lack of proactivity. I was sitting actually in this room 6 months ago, and there was another one of these conferences on urban air mobility, and there was a panel sitting up front, including government ministers, saying we are going to be at the front of urban air mobility, and then started talking about sandboxes and test environments and doing these things in on the computer rather than in real life. And I put my hand up and I made the point, we're already 5 years behind the rest of the world. And there is, I think, quite an introspective approach from some of our leadership in the country, and it is partly bred by arrogance, perhaps it's bred by sort of too many committees, too many people doing things. But those that do will succeed in these emerging technologies, and they will succeed in making them work how they want them to work, rather than these things just happening to them.
Thank you very much. And Miranda, Director of Innovation, so that's, looking ahead and thinking about fresh ideas, that's basically everything that you do. So sort of a similar question really around, has the time come for people to really accept the fact that now the time to change is here? And also it would be great if you could pick up on the second part of that question around how London sits compared to other cities around the world.
So I think a couple of points really. The answer is always technology, but remind me what the question was. There's always new technology, and for a company that's been around for 200 years, we've embraced the wrong technology through several iterations. So we've got evidence of that. And technology tends to mature a bit like fish. whereas the data it produces is often the fine wine, which will mature nicely and through which we can then go through. Now, at the risk of sounding like somebody like government, which I would absolutely hate to do, I would choose to defend Theo Blackwell, London's Chief Digital Officer. We don't sadly live in a benign dictatorship, but we do live in a city that has 33 independent boroughs who willingly exert their independence, and then therefore doing anything on a cross-London basis is very difficult. But it isn't all in London. There's great things happening in Scotland where they've learned to collaborate in a much more efficient way. And so there is now with the ability with all this new technology and all these new sensors producing enormous more amounts of data, there is the ability to make decisions in a more holistic way and measure the impacts more over a longer time and over cross-sector activity. So we can plan new pieces of infrastructure and see the impact on things like land value, on the need for social infrastructure. So if you put in a new bus lane, you can design it so that people are inclined to use the public transport because you've got the right social care at the ends, and you've built it in a way that doesn't compromise their access to green space. So there is absolutely new opportunity there. And there is really exciting new technology. Please don't think I'm not thrilled by drones and what they can do for us across many use cases. But it's now getting people to engage with and have the business models to understand the data and make decisions based on it over the right time period and span of control.
There's so many points there that we'll come back to, especially around getting people to engage with the data. But Nick, I'm sure you won't mind me saying that not unlike real estate, the legal profession hasn't been necessarily known to be at the forefront always of embracing new technology. That's changing, from what we can see. So similar, same first question to you really, because I think you'll come at it from a slightly different perspective. Is there this increasingly wider acceptance, not just among the general public and hopefully increasingly government, but across sectors as well and industries that change is here and needed?
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. Lawyers have been slow to adopt change and new technology for a long time, and I definitely think that's changing, and it's changing I think partly because of consumers. So the question you're sort of asking is there a need for change? And I think there's definitely a need for change, certainly in cities, because they're becoming more popular. The populations are growing, which is putting an increasing demand on services, much like law firms, there's an increasing demand on services. And I think if you think about smart cities and what they are, they're really data-driven cities which are able to dynamically respond to what their customers, their citizens want. And smart cities are able to basically provide new services because they can provide new dynamic sort of bus routes that are provided by companies that are collaborating with the local council. They're able to provide services more efficiently because you can use less utilities than you would do otherwise. And I think all of that comes down to what the consumer is expecting now. And consumers are expecting services to be delivered better, faster, more efficiently than they were in the past. And that's because of all the technology that's available to them now. If you think about what you can do now in comparison to even 5 years ago, you can open a bank account as a consumer without even going into the branch and by literally just taking a photo of your passport. So if you think about the changing landscape for consumers, they are now wanting services to be provided in a much more different way, which I think is then driving industry change. So we're having to change the way we deliver services because the consumers that we're dealing with want services delivered in a different way. They want their legal services to be delivered in the same way that they can get an Uber or the same way in which they can open a bank account. And if we don't change, then they'll get disappointed and move to someone who is able to provide services in that way. And I think cities are probably quite similar. We're competing with other cities. The better we are at providing our services more efficiently, the more popular we will be, which will drive growth in our city. And I think, just touching on the other point, I think in terms of the data that we're talking about, I think for a long time people were just experimenting with collecting data, but now there are lots and lots of tools that are available to them that weren't previously available to them, or which we didn't really understand. So there's been huge growths in machine learning, natural language processing, which is allowing us to analyze data in different ways and to really do interesting things with it, to dynamically respond to what our citizens want. So,
I suppose there's a bit of an interesting balance, really, to kind of achieve, in that people do want all of that. They want more efficiency, and we do live in the Uber society where things are very immediate. But at the same time, there's a lot of nervousness still around what being truly connected and a true smart city, and the next panel will really go into what makes a smart city and what that entails, and we've seen it in terms of privacy and that kind of thing. So, Duncan, coming back to you, I sort of really want to get under the skin of how should new technologies be pitched to the people. Now, Skyports is a really interesting example, and if anyone in here isn't aware of what Skyports does, maybe it'd be great if you could give a very quick overview. But it's such a fantastic, innovative concept, and one that makes a lot of sense to those in the know, but it's still quite alien, I think, to the general public. So how can they be reassured? Is it an issue of change management on the biggest scale that we've ever come across, and how are you approaching it?
Thanks. I'll try and answer that long question in less than
It's about
20
5
minutes.
questions in one.
Right, Skyports does two things. We do infrastructure for urban air mobility, which is effectively heliports for passenger and cargo carrying drones. We also have a business that does drone deliveries. So next week we're flying e-commerce deliveries in Finland, which will be the first urban e-commerce delivery by drone in the world, which is really exciting, working with the NHS here in the UK and many other health authorities around the world, and e-commerce providers to move stuff around by autonomous drone. Within the not too distant future, people will be moved around by drone as well. Urban air taxis take a few more years before it's autonomous, but it's real, it's coming, it's happening this year, it will be coming to London within the next 3 to 4 years. So that's a little bit about what Skyports does. It's an emerging sector. It's sort of new is scary. New is scary in everything. Is it the biggest change management we've ever seen? In a way, I think what the internet's done is extraordinary for the way people operate their lives. I think the answers to how we educate the populace and bring it into common parlance and make it an unscary reality is to do it in real life on a managed basis. And there's no better substitute. I can do as many press articles as I want, I can do as many speeches as I want, and tell you that you're going to be getting in a autonomously driven air taxi that's going to fly you from Heathrow to the West End in 15 minutes, and it's going to cost you no more than an Uber. And that all sounds great and a little bit scary, and it's very hard to conceive because it's new and there are no points of reference. What we spend a lot of time doing, and we'll be flying in Singapore, air taxis in Singapore later this year, hopefully be flying in London as a demonstrator in first quarter of next year, is to bring these things along, touch them, feel them, understand them, see them in the air, because that's the way we start to understand things and see the benefit of things. A particular question I always get asked about air taxis is, they're like helicopters, they're going to be super noisy. And the answer is they're not going to be super noisy, but if I say they're going to be 40 decibels or they're going to be 1/7 of the noise of a helicopter, it's an impossible point of reference. You've no idea. I have no idea what that means. I can't replicate what that's supposed to feel like in my mind. So the best way to do it, and what we're spending a lot of time doing, is working with vehicle manufacturers and bringing these vehicles so that people can get in them, touch them, feel them, understand them, and then really see the benefit of them. And stuff like this doesn't happen that you get 500 air taxis in the city on a Tuesday and by Wednesday they're flying all over the place. It's point to point, there's defined routes, it builds up slowly, you build those data points, those points of reference, the safety cases, and then it emerges. Actually very, very rapidly. If you look at the emergence of tech, it's hugely quick, but it is sequential and proven, and most importantly, certified by European Air Safety Agency, Civil Aviation Authority, Federal Aviation Authority. So it's got that underwrite of credibility as well.
But when it comes to sort of pitching it to people, it's that, you touched on a couple of issues there around the noise, and the fact that it would be an incremental increase rather than just suddenly overnight. We live in a completely different world. But what about physically getting into one of them and being one of the first flights? how is that going to work, and how do you think people will feel the first time they get into it? I mean, actually, I know a show of hands tends to make people cringe, but how many people here would be happy to get into it? An air taxi drone? Quite. How many wouldn't necessarily be happy? Okay, what reasons would you not feel comfortable?
I'm worried about the pollution issues. I'm worried about the mess around. I mean, the idea that they have used drones for delivering, Amazon drones for delivering, worries me a lot. And the experience of that in a city like this, you'd have to have wider streets. It's just horrible.
So I think we've sort of touched on an issue live, which is that when it comes to change and new technologies, there are hurdles to overcome in terms of accepting it, whether it's a new normal or a direction that some people don't want to go in. So Miranda, let's come on to you now. How as a society and how do cities around the world deal with that? Because this whole event is about how we put people at the centre of our technologies, and that has to be stuff that the people feel is delivering a benefit to them. So when you get a situation where not everybody feels that way, how do we handle that?
So another example would be driverless vehicles. The technology exists. There's no reason why any of us shouldn't be in a connected and partially autonomous vehicle already. The issue is that we have legacy infrastructure in terms of the fleet that we're already driving around, and the legislation is behind it, and particularly in drones as well. At the moment, the mechanisms for flying drones is very limited. We use them a lot at Ordnance Survey, and we'd love to use them more, but the laws don't allow us to yet, and we're part of the process for changing the laws. Another thing around sort of a connected and autonomous vehicle story is that we risk, by just rushing headlong into sort of driver replacement technology, that we miss out on the big societal benefit. Because if we managed the autonomous vehicle fleet both as a flock or as a swarm rather than individual bees, we can absolutely turn roads and turn roads on and turn roads off to improve air quality, to manage congestion, to let emergency vehicles through. And unless we think about the data in a holistic way, and the technology in a holistic way, and the city as a place, rather than individual consumers connected by need, we will have lost the opportunity that the smart city bandwagon has offered us.
Thank you very much. You mentioned a few times there legislation and legal issues, so it makes sense then, Nick, onto you. What are the legal issues around, well, rather some of the legal issues surrounding new innovation and indeed rolling these innovations out across whole cities? And we've got Miguel Gamino, who'll be here later, and he was former CTO of New York and San Francisco, and he'll have some experience in that. But that's quite a feat, isn't it? It's new, it's in some cases not entirely untested, but untested in the way that stuff that we've known for ages has been, and it's to be rolled out across entire cities.
Yeah, I think sort of, the primary purpose of laws and regulations in cities is obviously to achieve some balance between freedom and control. So, I think we've talked a bit about how governments are slow to react, but primarily I think we're actually quite good at this in London, at achieving that balance. I think we're pretty open when it comes to new technologies. We've got a great structure in place at the moment in terms of tech investment. So we've got the best tech investment in the whole of Europe, the top amount of money raised, and that's provided a great environment for technology companies to innovate in London, to provide new services. And so whilst I think there are lots of issues, planning issues, regulatory issues with drones at the moment, I don't think you could fly drones over London, autonomous drones over London. There's going to need to be regulatory change or regulatory approvals in order for that to happen. I think personally that the balance that we're achieving at the moment, broadly speaking, is generally pretty good for the people that are in our cities, and that's what we're focusing on. It's the people in the cities that are important. I think we could definitely do more to engage with those people. I think I think there are sort of three general camps of people that you can think about in cities. You've got the sort of, I think they're called smart citizens. I like to think of them as tech-enabled citizens. They're the people that actually use all this technology that we're talking about. You've got activists who are not people lying in the roads with their smartphones demanding new services, but people that are being really creative about finding solutions to problems. And then there's the sort of forgotten bunch of people that actually aren't going to use any of the services at all. And I think that's where we need to do more to achieve balance using laws and regulation to help those people that aren't actually going to be using the services. But overall, I think we've got a pretty good balance in London in terms of laws and regulation.
Miranda, would you agree with that? There's a good balance in London. You can say no.
So yes, I would agree that it's all about the balance. And the thing I would add to your people at the bottom is those people will still use other services, and they will be enthusiastic consumers, perhaps, of social services, which will be an entirely unoverlapping circle from the people who are using the drone taxis. And the challenge of legislation and government is that you've got to serve all of those populations. I think London does not do a bad job for itself, and also as a showcase for the whole of Great Britain. Because often when international people come and look at Great Britain, they only really want to look at London. And could they avoid the trip up the train to go and see what's happening in Manchester or Edinburgh, where really exciting stuff is happening? And I think that is the challenge: is to try things in different places, because people rather hate being a test bed. They like the idea of having the new technology, but they don't like the idea that somebody's going to get it much better after they've tried the duff version on them. And London, of course, has its own peculiar problems and beneficiaries. So some would say that the thing that has enabled London to laud itself as a smart city is the government intervention of creating TfL, so that mobility is relatively frictionless in London. Whereas if you're trying to use Citymapper or Move It in Liverpool, or in Burnley or somewhere, you're going to have a much harder time, because the data and the technology isn't there to enable that kind of experience.
This is a question for everybody. I know, Duncan, at the start you mentioned Singapore and Dubai as cities or areas and states to look at in terms of innovation, but we've been talking a lot about London. Obviously that's where we are today, but the world is a much bigger place than London, and I just wanted to open that question up to everybody. What cities have you seen that are really excelling and leading the way when it comes to not only introducing new innovations, but doing it in a way that balances that need for the people to feel like they're getting what they want and need, and also progress the city? So, Nick, do you want to start with that one?
So London actually comes really high up in the list, and I think then there's some Asian cities, so Seoul, Singapore, Helsinki does really well as well. And so, and obviously Toronto's got Sidewalk Labs, which you mentioned at the beginning. I personally think that's a really exciting proposition. So this is the idea of building effectively a test bed on the waterfront in Toronto, and really collaborating with businesses and startups that are local and international to help come up with new ideas for how a smart city could work. And I think that's really key. I think this idea of being open to using local businesses, local startups, because those are full of people that are A, really dynamic, but also B, users of all of the services that smart cities will provide. And so I think for me, that concept of basically building a smart city incubator within a space and starting to come up with ideas with lots of different people to utilize space more efficiently, to basically be able to have massing in spaces that are important, but also big, wide open spaces, less roads. They're completely rethinking the way mobility works, so that they have less roads, more open space, new services that will effectively enable people to be directed in the way that they need to go, and new utility services to help reduce how much water and electricity people are using.
And as I said, pick up the issue of EG Tech, and it's an interesting one. Dan Doktorov, one of the most interesting things that he said, it was very honest, was that despite all the stuff that he's done as president of Bloomberg and the things that he did as deputy mayor of New York, what he's trying to do now is by far the hardest thing he's ever attempted, and that actually he totally underestimated what he'd taken on. So it's exciting, but it's not easy, and that's why we're here today to discuss these issues. Duncan, I know that you mentioned Dubai and Singapore. Are there either any other places that you'd mention, or could you go into more detail about why those places are the ones that you've sort of brought up as being very tech savvy and enabled?
Yeah, actually I'm going to pick another one, which Nick just mentioned, Helsinki. Helsinki is an extraordinary example. They actually have very few problems they need to solve, but have some of the best talent solving other people's problems. And they made a smart decision. So Helsinki's got less than 6 million people, doesn't really have congestion, doesn't have sort of the urban challenges that we have in London or other Western cities around the world. But what they decided to do a number of years ago was be an innovator and a hub for human capital, and they did that by making it a very open environment and by permitting stuff to happen on a managed basis, but enabling it both through provision of governmental capital. So they are paying for the work we're doing in Helsinki in the next couple of weeks, being the first deliveries of e-commerce in an urban environment. And what that has manifested is an extraordinary talent pool, and they have now got hugely exportable products, whether that's in my sector or whether it's in energy innovation. They've got a huge program of energy innovation, and in the drone world, Google have put their drone business there. Tens and hundreds of millions of pounds of capital gone to Helsinki. Why has it gone there? Because the government have enabled it and allowed them to do stuff. And they were very clear in the outset of every program they do. It's how do we improve the quality of life for our population and other populations around the world. So every bit of their tech is about the applicability to the real world. So for us, it's about removing congestion and electrification of transportation. They've got a big program called Smart and Clean, which is how do they create energy on a sustainable basis. So that's driven huge public acceptance, and what they do is create the program, deliver the program in real life, and then consult with those affected by it, and then feed that back and reiterate. And it's an extraordinary methodology. It's slightly easier to do than London because the cities are less complicated. There's much more open space, but it's been hugely beneficial for them, and they've really created an innovation hub.
Thank you very much. There's also a piece on Helsinki in EG Tech as well, so have a read of it. We're clearly on trend at the moment. And Miranda, same question to you. Any cities or countries that you would hail as tech leaders particularly?
There's a lot of great stuff going on, and I would certainly agree with you two on that. I would also recommend the Arcadis report, which came out last year, looking at the investability of British cities. And it took a really balanced and data-centric view, and took into account what these different cities had in terms of legacies and peculiar problems, it resisted the temptation to rank them and put London at the top, which is often what's so tempting to do. It ranked them across several different dimensions, and so it's a dead easy read. Have a look at that, and you'll see how different cities are responding in different ways. I would just like to finish really with the thoughts of the mayor of Barcelona, which is often also cited as a smart city. He said that the city is a very sensible size for a decision-making unit, and as it happens, Barcelona predates Spain, and with all that's going on at the moment, I wouldn't bet against it outliving it as well.
Thank you very much. Let's have a look at some of the Slido questions. I apologise in advance. It doesn't mean I have to turn my back on you, but I will come back. So there's a question at the top there. So this is for Duncan. You made a good point about the government as an obstacle to technological innovation in real estate and related industries. What about the property industry itself? It largely consists of chartered surveyors who act as middlemen for transactions. Where is the incentive to innovate?
I think there's a massive disincentive to innovate in real estate, whether that's the legal sector, whether that's the construction sector. It's one of the most archaic industries, and it's my industry. I'm 20 years in commercial real estate. I'm a surveyor. It feels like being Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's an industry I love, but it's slow, it's archaic, it is closed-minded, and it's jobs for the boys, and it's been, it's one of the most historic. It's been around forever, and it will be around forever. But I think it's due a shake-up, and if people don't innovate, there will come a time, and it's actually probably taken longer than most people think, there will come a time where it gets shaken up around people. I said to Nick earlier before, he's been mandated by Mishcon to be their tech lead and to implement a load of new tech into the firm. He will soon be the most hated man in Mishcon de Reya because he will work 50% of their lawyers out of a job. And some very smart said to me, if you can explain what your job is within 5 minutes, a computer will be doing it within 10 years.
Wow, but everyone's secretly going through their heads thinking how long it will take them to describe their jobs now.
Longer now.
I am. So will cities with aged assets and infrastructure always be behind others, and can retrofitting tech have the impact consumers want? Miranda first and then Nick, that question.
No. Look at what Oxford and Cambridge are doing, two of the most ancient cities in the UK, and embracing new technology because they flipping have to. So Oxford will be the first to ban cars in the UK, probably. But I'll be wrong now. But you've got to find your point of acute need and therefore your unique ability to solve it most quickly.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think the primary thing you need to do is work out what the problem is. So you need to treat retrofitting technology or smart cities like you would product. You've got to iterate, you've got to understand what your users really want to get out of their city, and a lot of it is not necessarily about really shiny new toys. It's about using things more efficiently, about really understanding when your services are used and pushing your consumers in the direction that they might not understand they need to go. So I think really understanding your user base is a really important thing to do, and I think there's loads of stuff that cities can do even if they have got legacy technology.
Thank you very much. Are there any real life questions? It's fine, you can ask another one. If you could say just who you are, that'd be great.
My name is Simon Lovegrove of a company called M Health, and we are working in the Far East in ASEAN, where there are probably 20, I know of 20 new cities that are being built at the moment or have to be built. It's a really good research ground. But today, for example, this morning, I nearly didn't come because I saw on the news this morning that G20 Health Partnership Sustainable Goals 3 is saying that developed countries are not keeping up with healthcare. So healthcare is now becoming central to new cities and how cities should be. I don't hear it from anybody, and the technology that you talk about tends to work against that to some extent, because what you need to do is get walkability, you need to get parks. You did talk about parks, you did talk about open spaces, but we need to have much greater quality of life. We have to, and in the cities that I'm working in, I'm actually lecturing in Singapore at the beginning of next month, but Singapore is an isolated place. I work in Vietnam, which is a string with cities in between and large areas that don't connect. So all of these connectivities and things like that make for a very much more dynamic reason that we have to find different solutions. And I'm just interested to understand how you think about new solutions in new contexts rather than the existing context.
Thank you very much. Who'd like to take that question?
Can I go au contraire Blackadder? My challenge often when I'm talking to telcos, who it's all about 5G and this is going to be amazing, this new technology that we have, we tend to think of it in a narrow lens. Free Wi-Fi in the centre of London is never going to be an issue. People are going to be competing for it, but that will not justify the investment in delivering it. The thing that will justify the investment in a more advanced connectivity is the instrumented home, particularly with the elderly, that enables people to administer healthcare in their home and even preventative measures in their home. And that's an example of using technologies in ways beyond the commercial that take into account whole life and societal benefits, taking decisions on a place level that haven't been possible or even welcomed until now.
I can make one addition to that, but I completely agree with you, by the way, and I think the challenge is how you utilise technology to create time. In the reality, time is the only scarce resource. I mean, people in this room, you may think you need more money. You don't need more money. You need more time. And if you can use technology to create that time to use the parks, go for a ride, spend time with the family, do whatever, that is increasingly the scarcest resource we have. And I think a lot of these enabling technologies are actually, if you use them right, should be creating that. The challenge that, the urban air mobility challenge at the start of every sort of big conference is always, how do we save 1 billion people an hour a day? And that really does make a difference. And, over all of these technologies, it might be terrifying for a computer to take your job within 10 years, but if it maintains your standard of living and it enables you to work half the time, that's a real game changer for everybody.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yep, there's one over there, please.
Hello, it's Nigel Wally from Chimney. So we're dealing with residential connectivity. I have to say I'm pretty shocked to be sitting here at a conference on future cities to be talking about flying taxis and autonomous cars. To me, this is the discredited vision of the future that we saw with Fritz Lang or Blade Runner. Not one of you said the phrase public transport, which I find pretty shocking. I posit that Crossrail will have far more impact on London than flying cars ever will. Intelligent public transport, reinvesting in new tech is where the future is. Somebody said that the best definition of a 21st century city is one where the rich use public transport. I don't want to lock myself away in a flying car. I want to sit in a public transport with a beautiful train rushing through a city with Wi-Fi and be part of the city. I just don't see this focus on autonomous vehicles. It's bizarre to be sitting here listening to it.
Duncan.
By the way, in sitting in that train, you will be on an autonomous vehicle. I don't disagree with you. It's part of the solution. It's part of the solution. And in 1935, if I told you were going to get on a tin tube and fly across the Atlantic, you'd probably be pretty scared by that as well. It is part of connectivity. It's part of the solution. It is going to be entirely connected with everything else. There'll be package deliveries, there'll be blood deliveries, there'll be pathology sample deliveries, there might be e-commerce deliveries, but it's part of the solution, and it's also your choice. If you want to get on the train, great. The train's brilliant. I love the trains. They work really well. Crossrail will transport more people than flying cars forevermore, for sure. But it's part of the solution. It's part of your choice.
Any other questions? Right, so two there, and then I've got one to finish up, and then we must wrap up.
Hi, Akiro from Mason. I have a quick question for the whole panel. So you guys been talking about how these dictatorships have, they take on innovation because they're benevolent dictatorships, but then how you justify that all these innovations come from Western cities, and there's not really an innovation hub in any of these cities that even though they have this hub for it, they don't generate innovation, they take it on.
That was for the whole panel.
Yeah.
Okay. Who would like to take that question?
When you mentioned the dictatorship.
I'll do it again. I don't mind at all. And again, I agree. And when I mentioned dictatorship,
I've
I said
never heard the phrase, well, you're the one that mentioned dictatorships on a panel before.
and I did mention the caveat, but there are a bunch of things that are not great about dictatorships, and I totally agree.
All that.
They are enablers of making stuff happen, but maybe they're not the greatest sort of factories for innovation, and maybe that's change number 2 that we need to try and implement. I don't know how to solve that. In a way, it's great that they do adopt quickly, because that creates industry, it creates jobs, it creates an open society, it creates tourism, it creates inward investment. But he's right. I mean, they're not the greatest innovators, but they're good adopters.
Thank you very much. There are 2 other questions, or just one maybe, and we'll make sure that Nick and or Miranda answers the next one. Give Duncan a break.
A lot of the safeguards with technology don't seem to be thought about when the technology is being invented. And a lot of technologies, they're supporting terrorists, they're supporting fraudsters, they're supporting drug dealers, and to the person with the drones, they can also deliver bombs. So why aren't the bad side thought about when they're being invented? Because you can foresee that these things can be used for bad things as well as good.
And that naturally is another question for Duncan, but Miranda and then Nick.
So I think to Duncan's point then, that's why it all takes so long. So I was at a hackathon last week where the very nice man with only a first name from CPNI, who the spooks, said, not everybody is like you and believes that the technology will be used universally for good. You have to design in the way and have the standards and the laws over there that make sure that society is safeguarded. So part of that is absolutely going on and part of the necessary slowness of seeing technology adopted.
Thank you. And Nick, do you want to have a go at that one too?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, that's why we've got this sort of balance, the control, and maybe in some places we'll need extra controls for some of these new technologies that can be used for bad. But I think also just not focusing on them or not using them isn't going to stop them being created or used for bad things. So I think we need to be part of how these things are created. We need to be part of the conversation so that we can really understand how they can be used, how they might be used by other people, so that we can hope to implement the right controls and put the right controls in place for those new technologies in the future.
I just want to add that I'm very grateful that we're seeing a maturing conversation about the value of personal data. Cambridge Analytica may yet be a very positive example which has woken people up to the value of their data, so that instead of giving it away, people are starting to trade their data and use it more judiciously, so that we as a society become richer through it.
Thank you very much. I'm aware there's plenty more questions on Slido, and I'm sure there's questions out there too, which is fantastic. But all of our panellists will be available afterwards for a chat if you want to catch up with them. So just to finish off then, and I'll start with you, Miranda, just one more question from me. And I feel bad asking this as the tech editor. I feel like I shouldn't be asking it. But is any of this pie in the sky? Any element of it at all? Or should we be entirely embracing the anything is possible approach to future-proofing our cities?
No, of course. Well, some of it is bonkers. I remember being interviewed by Rory Ketland-Jones, who's the BBC solicitor, who just came away from somebody who said, I've never met anybody so batshit crazy in my whole life. But you've got to listen to those people because you ask the question, what problem are you trying to solve? And where is the kernel of truth underneath all of this? No, listen to more loons and see what it's actually telling you.
Thank you very much. Duncan?
For sure, some of it's pie in the sky. And you can only really work that out by doing it and failing, and the Americans are really good at it. They celebrate success, and they celebrate failure just as much. They fail fast, they tend to fail big, but they do it quick and they move on to the next thing. For sure, some of it's pie in the sky. I think trying to predict the downsides and the benefits without doing it is hugely difficult. And I think one technology spawns another and manifests in a way that nobody thinks about. So yeah, it is. I'm not sure what is, but time will tell.
Thank you. And Nick?
Yeah, so I definitely think it's about being open to new ideas. I think that part of what we need to do is make sure we engage with our population more than we do at the moment. We need to make sure they're all open to change as well. And it's about having innovation hubs where these new ideas can be tested out, where new ideas can be put forward by the population, because that's where we'll get some of our best ideas, are from these sort of activist, smart citizens that are looking to really change the way things work and change the way things are done.
Thank you so much. Could everybody join me in thanking our first panellist this morning?